Math 100, lesson 7-6. Just in case you were wondering, there wasn't a lesson 7-5. It's not a material that we are required to cover, so 7-6, you are in the right place. So this time we are solving rational equations, not simplifying expressions. So here is an example of an equation. It will actually have an equal sign in the actual problem, and our directions will in fact say solve, which means we're trying to find the value of x. All right, so when we are solving rational equations, here's what we are going to do first. We are going to find the least common denominator. All right, that's going to be our first step. The second step is we are going to multiply everything on both sides by that least common denominator. And what that will do for us is it will get rid of our fraction. All right, the next thing we are going to do is now we'll go through our steps for solve for the variable. Okay, it may be x or y or whatever variable they're giving us. And the last step, which is going to be super important here, okay, this one is super important. If x in any way is in the denominator, okay, abbreviation there for denominator, make sure to check your answer. Now here's what I mean by check your answer. We're going to plug it in and see if it actually works. All right, here's why. If x is in the denominator, there is a rule that says you can never have 0 in the denominator. So if you gave an x value that made 0 in the denominator, it doesn't work. So we'll get to that. I'll point it out to you when we get there. All right, let's do this problem. We'll walk through these steps. We are going to first find our least common denominator. Well, the least common denominator for 6 and 8 is 24. Okay, so I've done that. My least common denominator is 24. So step number 2 says multiply everything on both sides by 24. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to say 24 times both sides. Okay, now for some of you, it might be easier for you to literally write it beside each term. That way you don't forget to multiply. So now I can do that. I'll write it by all of them. So 24 times x over 6 plus 24 times 1 over 6 plus 24 times x over 8. All right, and now we simplify. All right, so I need to think of this as having a 1 in my denominator. 6 goes into itself once. It goes into 24 4 times. That leaves me with 4x divided by 1, which is 4x. Yay, the fraction is gone. Bring down my equal sign. Put a 1 up under that 24, so I have my fraction. 6 goes into itself once. It goes into 24 4 times. 4 times 1 leaves me with 4 divided by 1, which is just 4. Plus, put a 1 up under my 24. 8 goes into itself once, into 24 3 times. So I'm left with 3 times x gives me 3x divided by 1. Fraction is gone. Look at that. Now we have this simple algebra equation. Okay, so we get our x's on the same side. And I'm left with x is equal to 4. Boom. Now, don't stop there. Always, always, always make sure you pay attention to this last step if x is in the denominator. Well, when I go and look at my original problem, okay, x was not in the denominator. So I'm good. I don't have to plug that in and check it. That is my answer. X is 4. Okay, let's try again. So we have rational equation, just an equation involving fractions. All right, first thing I've got to do is find my least common denominator. All right, the smallest number that 2, 18, and 3 all go into, okay, would be 18, and then they all have, the other variable that I see is an x, other factor that I would see as an x. Least common denominator is 18x. If you need to write them out like we were doing before, and less than 7, 4, that's fine. All right, so I found my least common denominator. So everything on both sides is going to get multiplied by 18x. So 18x times 5 over 2x is equal to 18x times 17 over 18 minus 18x. I don't know if you guys noticed, I did not put my x there. It needed to be there. Minus 18x times 1 over 3x. All right, so there it is. I multiplied everything by 18x. There it is. Okay? Everything gets multiplied by 18x. All right, now actually I have to do all that multiplication. All right, so I'm going to think about it like this. Put a 1 up under that 18x. 2 goes into itself once. It goes into 18 9 times. This x divided by x gives me 1. Those are common factors. I multiply the things that are left. I'm left with 9 times 1 times 5 in my numerator. My denominator would be a 1. All right. 18 goes into itself once, into itself once. So in my numerator, I'm left with 17 times x times 1. Minus, put a 1 up under the 18x. 3 goes into itself once. It goes into 18 6 times. X divided by x, those are common factors. It gives me a 1. So I'm left with 6 times 1 times 1, all divided by 1. So I have this simple algebraic equation. So add 6 to both sides. I get 51 is 17x. So divide by 17. And I get x is 3. Now wait a minute. This is where you've got to go check it. All right? Because x was in my denominator in the original problem. So if I go up here to the original problem, I'm going to write check it over here. Really what I'm looking for is that going to make me have a 0 in the denominator? That's what I'm looking for. Is it going to make me have a 0 in the denominator? So my denominators, where x is involved, is 2x and 3x. Well, 2 times 3 and 3 times 3. Neither one of those gives me a 0, okay? Can't have 0 in denominator. That's what we're looking for. That's the whole reason we're checking. And we don't. We don't get a 0 in the denominator. When I plug in my solution, x is 3, I do not get a 0 in the denominator. So that is my solution, x equals 3. Awesome. All right, let's try another. All right, my first step. When I look at this problem, it bothers me that that 9 is not a fraction. So I'm going to look at it as a fraction, 9 over 1. All right, so now I need to find my least common denominator. Well, those are already factored. My denominators are factored. So I take every factor that I see, which would be a 1 times a x minus 3. Well, when you multiply that, you just get x minus 3. So there's my least common denominator. So everything is going to get multiplied by x minus 3. So I'm going to put my least common denominator in a different color. So x minus 3 times x minus 3 is equal to my least common denominator times 3 over x minus 3 plus x minus 3 times that 9 over 1. All right, so I have multiplied everything by my least common denominator. All right, now when I do that, I put a 1 up under that x minus 3, and now I have common factors that divide to give me 1. So I'm left with a 1 times x, which is just x. If I put a 1 up under here, I have common factors that divide out. I'm left with 1 times 3. Now over here, 9 over 1, really there's no sense in seeing that 1 anymore, not for this part of the problem. Okay, so I have 9 times x minus 3, which would give me 9x minus 27. Okay, I distributed the 9. Okay, 3 minus 27 is a negative 24. Okay, let's get our x's on the same side. And I end up with negative 8x is equal to negative 24. Divide. So x is positive 3. Now we got to go back and check it. Okay, because x was in the denominator. All right, so I am checking, can x equal 3? That's what I'm looking for. Can x equal 3? All right, so look at the denominators of the original problem. Well, if I plug in, okay, so here's my two denominators. They're both x minus 3 and then a 1. So here's my denominator, x minus 3. If I plug in the solution that I found, which was 3, uh-oh, it gives me 0. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Okay, so what that means is x cannot equal 3. That's what it means. X cannot equal 3. So we got this solution here. In My Math Lab, you cannot say x equals 3. In My Math Lab, you're going to say, well, there is no solution. And the reason is, when you plug in that 3, it doesn't work. It puts a 0 in the denominator, so no solution. There is a symbol for no solution in My Math Lab, and it looks like a 0 with a slash over it. All right. So there are a few of those examples. Okay, let's do one that is a little bit bigger. All right, so 11 over x squared minus 25 plus 4 over x plus 5 is equal to 3 over x, that should be a minus 5. All right, so the first thing we've got to do is decide what is the least common denominator. Well, in order to decide that, I need to factor this x squared minus 25. I know it's difference of squares, so it's x minus 5 and x plus 5. Those are the factors. So my least common denominator, I take every factor that I see. Well, that would be x minus 5 and x plus 5. That would be my least common denominator. All right. So everything is going to get multiplied by that least common denominator. So this is going to get really big. All right. I'm going to try to write a little smaller this time. All right, so there's my least common denominator times 11 over Now when I write this fraction over here, I'm going to write the factored denominator. Okay, x squared minus 25 is that denominator. Okay. Okay, this is my least common denominator. Now it gets multiplied times the 4 over x plus 5 is equal to my least common denominator times the 3 over x minus 5. Woo! Almost ran out of space. Okay, so everything got multiplied by my least common denominator. So my least common denominator, I'm going to put it a 1 under each of those. All right, now any common factors I'm going to divide out. All right, well x minus 5 and x minus 5, x plus 5 and x plus 5. So over here, this leaves me with 1 times 11. Fraction gone. Okay, x plus 5 and x plus 5. So I'm left with 4 times x minus 5 in that numerator, 1 in the denominator, equals common factor x minus 5, x minus 5. So I'm left with 3 times x plus 5. So now I have this little algebra problem to solve. I'm going to go ahead and distribute. All right. 11 minus 20 is negative 9. You always simplify before you move things around. I'm going to subtract 3x. So negative 9 plus x is 15. And then I'm going to add 9. I know some of you like to do 2 steps at once. Keeps me from messing up. X is equal to 24. Gotta go check it. Okay, because x was in the denominator. So, look at my denominators. Alright, remember our denominators were x squared minus 25. They were x plus 5 and x minus 5. Those were my denominators. When I plug in my answer of 24, am I going to get a 0 for any of those? Now, you can go through the trouble of doing it, but you are not going to get 0 for any of those. So it does work. X is 24. All right, if you do the math there, 24 squared, some big number, minus 25 is not 0. 24 plus 5 is 29. 24 minus 5 is 19. Okay, so we didn't get 0. So that means it is okay to say 24 is my correct answer. All right, one last thing in this section, and you're going to love this, it doesn't involve very many numbers. It's solving for a specific variable, okay? Solve for a variable, and it'll tell you which variable to solve for, all right? So I'm going to give you this equation. And then it'll tell you which variable we're solving for. So we are solving this equation, a equals b divided by x plus 2. A equals b divided by x plus 2. We are solving that for x. We're not always solving for x. You have to pay attention to what it says. Okay, so in other words, so get x alone. Currently, x is not alone. It's got a 2 with it, and it's in the denominator up under the b. Now, the only way to get it out from the denominator is going to be to multiply both sides by x plus 2. Okay, multiply both sides by x plus 2. Over here on the right-hand side, the reason is that divides out and I'm left with just b. Now over here, I've got to distribute. Okay, so I'm left with ax plus 2a. Now x is still not alone, but it's not in the denominator anymore. Okay, so now I'm going to subtract 2a. So this would say b minus 2a. Okay, moved it to the other side. Now x is close to alone, but it needs to be divided by a. So x is equal to b minus 2a divided by a. And there we go. That's called solving for a variable. And they could define for you any equation. Okay, so they might say something like solve V equals LWH for W. Now in this case, that means the volume equals the length times width times height. You don't have to know that. However, we're trying to get W alone. Well, currently, W is being multiplied by L and H. So the only way to move L and H is to divide by them on both sides. Okay, so that divides out and gives me 1. These divide and give me 1, which means I'm left with W on the right-hand side all by itself. V is equal to V divided by LH would be my W. All right, so just figuring out how do you move stuff away from the variable that they're asking you to get alone. All right, and that is all for section 6.